was once a Carnival slideshow where 2-pound premature babies were on exhibit for the low price of 25 cents. Sounds pretty strange, but this slideshow and its creator would lead to pioneering breakthroughs in the treatment of premature infants. While we've had the intensive care unit, or ICU, for adults or children with serious medical emergencies, we've only more recently had a place for babies who are fighting for their lives to go. The Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, or NICU, opened up a whole new frontier in the care of newborns. We wouldn't have the NICU we have today without its founding father, Dr. Martin Cooney, who in fact wasn't even actually a doctor. He was, however, a compassionate man that was committed to saving the lives of premature babies. The incubator is the center of the frontier of the NICU. A French obstetrician came up with the idea for the incubator when he was looking at one that kept chicken eggs and freshly hatched chicks warm. He began to think, if an incubator could do this for a chicken, why can't we build one for human babies? He then created a crude isolette or incubator. A version of this incubator is still used today. The interview with new mother Brittany Katopka shows just how important the incubator still is today.
The main thing that was doing for her was keeping her warm. When she came in, even though she was all bundled up in blankets, and they even put her under a heating blanket, her temperature was 94 degrees, and she could not maintain her own temperature. And so they used a special heater to warm her up, and they used the incubator to keep her warm.
This invention alone led to a 28% decrease in infant mortality over 3 years at a French maternity hospital. Although it had such great results, most people didn't realize its full potential. But one person did, Martin Cooney. In 1896, Martin Cooney first showed the incubator exhibit in the Berlin Exposition. He named his exhibit the Child Hatchery. He went to the first exposition to demonstrate the effectiveness of the incubator. Even a century later, the effectiveness of the incubator is still being proved daily. Blair and Judine Andrews put into perspective how crucial the incubator was to their son. Would have your experience differed if there wasn't an incubator?
He wouldn't be alive.
We would have just probably been able to hold him until he passed, and there was no life without an incubator.
Upon arriving in Berlin, Cooney acquired 6 little babies who were all expected to die, and he placed them on display in incubators. Thankfully, all 6 survived. A few years later, in 1898, he brought his child hatchery to the United States. It first premiered in Omaha, Nebraska at the Trans-Mississippi and International Exhibit. Since Nebraska was a bit more rural, he struggled to get the people or the press to show interest in his exhibit. The second American showing was at the Pan American exhibit in Buffalo, New York in 1901, where Cooney first showed his babies on the entertainment side of the exhibit in a building specially designed for this baby show. At the Pan American exhibit, Martin Cooney and his live babies caught the attention of the press. In 1903, Martin Cooney officially immigrated to the United States from Germany, and 1 year later he opened up his permanent exhibit in Brooklyn, New York at Coney Island's Lunar Park. This exhibit was open from 1904 until 1943. Many of the parents of these premature babies at Coney Island were told to begin to plan for burial when their child was born. When Lucille and her already passed twin sister were born, their parents were told to hold off on a funeral for her sister as Lucille would not survive the day. Lucille's daughter later interviewed her about her experience 94 years later.
My father said I was so tiny he could hold me in his hand. I think I was only about 2 pounds, and I couldn't live on my own. I was too weak to survive.
So the hospital didn't have anything to offer?
No, they didn't have any hope for me at all. It was just, you die because you didn't belong in the world. So when I was born, my father was looking for a blanket or a towel to wrap me up in, and somebody said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm taking it to the incubator in Coney Island." The doctor said, "There's not a chance in hell that she'll live." He said, "But she's alive now." He hailed a taxi cab and took me to Dr. Cooney's exhibit, and that's where I stayed for about 6 months.
How do you feel knowing that people paid to see you?
It's strange, but as long as they saw me and I was alive, it was all right. I think it was definitely more of a freak show, something that they ordinarily did not see. But I remember going when I was older to see the babies.
You met Dr. Cooney, right?
Yes, he happened to be there at the time I went in. And I went over and I introduced myself to him. And there was a man standing in front of one of the incubators looking at his baby. And Dr. Cooney went over to him and he tapped him on the shoulder. And he said, "Look at this young lady. She's one of our babies. And that's how your baby's going to grow up."
Over his years in business, Cooney had over 8,000 preemies in his care and managed to save about 6,500, or 76% of them. Each one of these babies that he saved was sent home with their identification necklace and a diploma saying that they graduated from the exhibit. One fascinating part of the infantorium is that his daughter was one of the incubator babies. As an adult, she worked alongside her father, saving thousands of other babies. Along with his daughter, Cooney employed 15 trained nurses who all worked in 8-hour shifts. He also employed 5 wet nurses who provided milk for the babies in the incubators. The biggest negative to having a baby in the infantorium, the name that replaced the child hatchery, was that the parents dropped their baby off and would not get to hold him again until he was discharged from the infantorium. In the aforementioned interview with Blair and Judine, they described how they would feel if they couldn't hold their son.
I can't imagine having a baby and having to surrender that to someone else and not being able to be a part of his care. That would have been heartbreaking. Clearly, you would have done whatever you had to do. If they said this is the only way that we can take care of your child, we would have done it.
Yeah.
So if I had to put the baby in a sideshow, that would have broke my heart, but I suppose you do what you have to do.
Martin Cooney was able to provide free care for the babies by charging a 25-cent entry fee to all who visited. His exhibit showcasing live babies in Coney Island was open for 40 years. Every year, he was open from spring to fall. At the end of each one of his seasons, he would continue to nurture each baby until they reached standard birth weight, which is about 5 to 6 pounds. Then he would send them home. Dr. Cooney refused to accept any babies over the weight of 3 pounds, as he thought they had a higher chance of survival and he had limited space. You would think that Martin Cooney would be considered the father of neonatal care, but in all reality, it's a man named Julius Hess. He is one of the first official doctors to focus on neonatal care. Even though Dr. Hess and Dr. Cooney had very similar ideas, Hess, as a doctor of medicine, gets more credit for the innovation of neonatal care, due to his more conventional ways of caring for the infants. Hess has always pointed people back to Martin Cooney, saying if it wasn't for him, he would not be where he is today. Dr. Hess specialized in designing the first NICUs in the United States, called infant care units. They were a lot less specialized as they mainly focused on keeping the baby warm and away from germs. In the 1960s, infant care units transitioned to NICUs. Today, 10 to 15% of all babies born in the US are cared for in a NICU. In the previously mentioned interview with Brittany, she explains how the modern NICU has affected her young family.
For us, it helped keep our family a family. Ruth here was born at 37 weeks, 2 days, but a couple days after discharge, she wasn't feeding well. She was very yellow, jaundiced, and we were doing everything we could, but we couldn't get her to open her eyes for more than a minute. She ended up getting admitted to the NICU, where they ran a bunch of different tests. Her temperature was 94 degrees, and so she ended up being in the NICU for a few days.
In order for the medical frontier of the NICU to be understood, we need to uncover the incubator that started it all, the carnival that popularized the idea, and the progress that has been made due to Dr. Cooney's use of the incubator. His early use of baby incubators in the child hatchery led to the first neonatal intensive care units, which have saved millions of lives. Without the NICU, the stories in the interviews would have ended in tragedy, and many other people that we know and love would not be alive today.